Welcome to week 7 of IS 520 and MBA 614. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we have going on for this week. Let me share screen 3. All right, so here it looks like we've got just the find smallest number homework problem. I think students would agree this is probably the most difficult of the homework problems. At least that would be the case for many of them. And so in this particular task, I'm asking you to take an array of strings and find in that what is the smallest valid integer value. So you want to make sure that you read through, of course, the assignment description, but also read through the notes that are put in the code because they get you quite a ways along the way there. But another kind of big important idea here is that we will solve a very similar problem to this one as we're working through part 2 of the introduction to arrays. So it might behoove you to make sure that you have already done creating arrays part 1 and then creating arrays part 2, because you'll find that here in part 2 is where we're really working through this idea of doing kind of looking over an array of numbers and finding the smallest value. That'll be part of what we need to do to solve the particular case that we're working on here. And then of course, a little peek ahead at next week, the information that you'll really be doing for your project from these 2 lectures, creating arrays, is going to be this big Boggle project that will be due in the following week. So that should get you started for this homework assignment that's due on Tuesday of this week. So let's go ahead and talk about the next of the founding values, or as I would call it, the lost founding values. So we've talked about so far divine providence, private virtue. I guess we've also talked about at the very beginning, we talked about liberty, we talked about justice, and then last week was divine, or rather was private virtue. So this brings up another one. And again, I'm not sure that I really have a really great name for this value. I'm just going to refer to it as the American work ethic. We don't hear much about the American work ethic. Sometimes we still hear about the Protestant work ethic. They're very closely related to each other. But let's go ahead and kind of talk about where this came from. So first thing we have to realize is that from the 1300s on till late 1700s, maybe to the mid 1800s in Europe, we lived largely under a feudal society. So this means that we have really 3 groups of people. We have those who fight. This is like the nobles. So they are the landowners. They are the ones whose really responsibility in the society is to protect from invasion, from outside threats. And that's roughly 8 to 10% of the population. We have maybe not quite that high. We have maybe 3 to 5% of the population that we would call those who pray. And so these are all of the clergy then fits into this category. And then the rest is everyone else, and that's those who work. And so these would be the serfs in the feudal approach. So the idea is that if you are a serf, you work the land, you do not own the land. So the majority of your labor goes to support the guy who owns the land, and you keep just barely enough to get by. And the truth is, you may not be contributing that much more, depending on the conditions. But the truth is, it is a subsistence level of living. So that's the background here. So now in 1607, we have the Virginia Company that comes to establish the first successful British colony in North America. And they are coming with one thing in mind, and that is to find gold. For 100 years, the English have been watching the Spanish bring every year a ship, rather I should say a fleet of treasure ships back from the New World, just full of gold and silver. And they just get the idea that there must be gold everywhere over here in America. And so we just got to go somewhere, start looking, we're going to find it. And so the idea here is that we're going to go and we're going to find gold. Now, England really doesn't get into the game prior to this, just because Spain really has dominance on the seas. They couldn't protect a treasure fleet, and they're really not able to get into this business. That all changes in 1588 with the destruction of the Spanish Armada. That would be another kind of interesting separate story, kind of a fascinating historical event that changed the course of nature. In any event, so now we really get England where it has parity on the seas, and it's ready to step into its role as a colonial power. So Virginia Company comes to find gold. The biggest problem, of course, there's no gold in Virginia. And so they very quickly realize we're not going to find any gold here. Now, the Virginia Company has poured just untold amounts of money into this expedition. And there's no gold. That's really bad news for the investors. So the Virginia Company trying to figure out how we're going to give a return to these investors. And they think, well, they look around and they go, wow, there's all this old growth hardwood forests. I mean, there's a crazy amount of fuel over here. By this time, early 1600s, England is nearly deforested for, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for wood to build ships, and we're looking for wood to burn. It's kind of right around this time, a little bit later, that we start realizing we can burn coal, but up to this point, we've been burning wood for heat. And so they see, wow, there's all this fuel here. Wow, what can we do with fuel? Well, one of the things that takes a lot of fuel is making glass. You know, making glass is a relatively expensive item. And when I say glass, I don't mean sheets of glass, but I mean like glassware. So making glasses and plates and, you know, even candlestick holders out of blown glass. And so we can use all this fuel here. We can, you know, fill a ship full of glassware, and we can send it back to Europe. It's like a pretty good idea, but they can never get their kilns working efficiently enough to make a go of it at that. For example, it took them like 2 weeks of continuously firing the kiln to be able to make glass for the first time. And they just didn't have the experience and the technology to be able to do it. It's not until they realize that there is a plant that grows really well here that they'll pay good money for in Europe. And of course, that's tobacco. Interestingly enough, it's not even Virginia tobacco. It's tobacco that's imported by John Rolfe from South America. It's great tobacco, I guess. I've never tried it, but it's from South America. Anyway, this looks like this might actually work, but here's the problem. To cultivate tobacco, you need lots of labor. And although in England and many parts of Europe at this time, we've got an excess of labor to go with the land that we have. It's for the first 100, 150 years or more of America. It's just exactly the opposite. We've got so much land, but not enough people to come and work it. So imagine, you know, here we are in the feudal society. Kind of imagine what the first posters might have looked like, you know, to try to get people to come to America. Come to America. We'll give you the same deal that you have in the old world. That is, you can work for me for your whole life. Oh, and not get anywhere. Oh, and by the way, we might not have enough food to make it through the winter, and the local inhabitants might rise up and kill us at any time. That's not a deal that anyone signs up for. But unfortunately, the Virginia Company has no money, and the investors aren't going to come up with any more. So they have to find out a way to work with what they've got to be able to get people to come over. Now, in Europe, it seems like strange to us today, but in Europe in 1600s, and you know, even going back to the 1300s and earlier, there's no land for sale. Land does not change hands by sale. It changes hand only through inheritance. So if you are the oldest son of a landowner, you're going to inherit if you live long enough. That's how you will get land. If you're the second son of a landowner and you know, your older brother inherits, you get nothing. Now, it's kind of harsh. There's some really good reasons for that. They don't really have time to talk about today, but there was a reason that was the rules. They're called laws of primogeniture, and they played an important role in society. So what are you going to do if you're second, third, fourth son of, you know, a wealthy landowner? Well, most families would send one son into the clergy. And so that's one way that you could have a kind of a respectable life, is go into the clergy. Another avenue for you was military service. In fact, it was kind of the one avenue that you could acquire land. You can't buy it, but if you really distinguish yourself in battle for the king, he might grant you some land. But the third option is that if your father, in addition to having lots of land, also has some money, he could outfit you as a merchant. So you could get a ship and you can go into business for yourself. And so by the 1600s, we have really a merchant class in England. A group of men that are fabulously, in many cases, fabulously wealthy. They have lots of disposable income, often much more than the landed gentry do. But they have no land, and that's what they really want. They feel like second-class citizens. In fact, they could participate in politics. They could run for office as a member of parliament, but they qualify for the House of Commons, not for the House of Lords, and that's because of their status as a second-class citizens. They're not landowners. They're not lords. They are common. And so, the Virginia Company realizes, wow, here we got these guys who want land and who have money. Well, we have money, and I'm sorry, Virginia company says, we have land, and so we don't have any money, but we can make something work out with these guys. So in fact, boy, does Virginia have land. They are defined from a certain latitude to a certain latitude, from the East Coast to the West Coast, wherever that may be. We didn't know where the West Coast was, but it was all Virginia. In fact, it seems funny to say now, but most of Utah used to be in Virginia. If you were to drive south just as far as Nephi, that would have been into land that was once part of the Virginia colony. And so they come up with this plan. It's called the headright system, and they say, all right, we're going to set aside, Virginia company is going to set aside 100 acres, you merchant class, for every person you can bring over here to work in the tobacco plantations. We will give you 100 acres of land. And you can do, actually 50, sorry, was that right? 50 acres will go directly to you. 50 acres will be set aside to the person that you bring over. Now, if that person doesn't happen to live the 7 years that they've got to work to earn that land, then that land doesn't go back to the Virginia company. It goes back to the merchant, the man who brought them over. And so now we have a really interesting deal, and it exists nowhere else in the world. You could be born with nothing, with no prospect to inherit. You're going to work for your whole life. But now, if you've got the courage to come to America and endure the fact that we might have enough food to make us through the winter, and the local inhabitants might rise up and kill us at any time. Oh, and by the way, the likelihood that you're going to live the 7 years of work that you're required for you to earn this 50 acres of land, the likelihood that you'll live to collect that is only about 50%. Now we look at that situation and we ask ourselves, who takes that deal? And now the answer is almost anyone will take that deal if they've got a little bit of bravery. Because now, for the first time in anyone's lifetime, in fact, going back for 200-300 years, it's an opportunity that just doesn't exist anywhere in Western Europe, or probably in Europe at all. And that is, through my own labor, through the work of my hands, I can build a better life for myself and my family, and I can do it in a single generation. It is an amazing opportunity. And so people will flock to this opportunity. Now, this ends up creating a problem, because as these, we're bringing folks over to labor here, but after 7 years, they will now become landowners, and they will become more competition for the scarce labor. And so ultimately, the plan doesn't work long term, and Virginia will turn to chattel slavery, to enslaving Africans. I shouldn't say they're not doing the enslaving, but they are buying enslaved Africans and using that as a perpetual source of labor, one that will not ultimately end up being a competitor for scarce labor resources. That, again, would be a talk for a different day. But because now we have the ability for you to improve your life through your labor here in America, we developed very quickly a very different feeling for labor. In Europe, if you're the person who works with their hands, that is a sign of the lowness of your class. There is nothing noble about the labor that you do. It just every day reminds you that you are the lowest class of society, and you will never be anything but the lowest class of society. But in America, because through your labor you can become a landowner, that you can literally become wealthy in your lifetime, labor takes on a different characteristic. In America, it becomes noble to be a laborer, even to work with your hands, tilling the earth, tilling the soil. And so that is a difference that is probably the first of all of the American values to emerge. It is the first thing that really differentiates Americans from Europeans. And it's a differentiation that exists somewhat to this day. So, I mean, to this day, American workers are still marginally more productive than European workers. To this day, American workers take only about half the vacation of European workers, but the gap has closed tremendously in the past 60 or 70 years. And so again, this is a value that it actually lies at the heart of what we refer to as the American dream, is this value, what we call the American work ethic. So much so that, we felt here in America that it was actually one of the ways to show our devotion to God was to do our work, whatever that was, to do it really, really well, that was pleasing to God, and that was something that we could really, show our devotion to God. And so very different feeling about that work. And again, this is something that I think we've lost, and that would make our nation a better place if we kind of re-engage that and recognize, yeah, work is a noble thing. And that's part of what makes America what it is.